Hi, everybody. Welcome to our YouTube channel for Keijsers Koning. I'm Bart Keijsers Koning, and we're here with Eric Sall and his solo exhibits, Rhythm Don't Rhyme. And we're super excited to have him join us. Eric was a MFA graduate in 2006 from Virginia Commonwealth University, and he also holds a BFA from Kansas City Art Institute. And he received various fellowships, including the Grandwood Art Colony at the University of Iowa, the Joan Mitchell Foundation Grant, and Virginia Museum of Fine Arts Fellowship. He's exhibiting Roswell Museum, Dolphin Gallery, the Nerman Museum of Contemporary Art in Kansas, Dow Museum of Contemporary Art, to name a few. We would like to welcome him to his own show. Welcome, Eric. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me, Bart.
Excellent. And right now you're in Tulsa, correct?
Yep.
Excellent.
I'm at home in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
It's kind of interesting. Our history was acquainted with your work via a show at ATM Gallery, and I've always was following it, and it was actually through Instagram that I saw when I moved to Texas that I saw you were just a few hours away from me, and we connected and we did a studio visit, which was about a year ago or something.
Yeah.
And I always find it so fascinating how you ended up in Tulsa. If you want to kind of tell us a little bit about it, because I don't think quite a few people know about it, and I just love the program.
My wife and I ended up here. Rachel Hayes is an artist too. We ended up here just over 7 years ago. It's hard to believe it's been that long, but we had been hopping around to a couple different artist residency programs. We came here from Roswell, New Mexico, where we had been at the Roswell Artist in Residence program for the second time. We were there first back in 2002. And after several moves, we ended up back there as part of a multi-tiered exit from New York City. We'd been in New York City 2 different times, and the second time we were there, when we decided to leave, I had applied to a couple different residencies. One was in Iowa City. You mentioned that. I was a fellow at the Grantwood Art Colony, and then followed that with the Roswell Artist in Residence program for that second time. And then this Tulsa Artist Fellowship was brand new. A friend had posted it on Facebook. Sounded really interesting because they were inviting people to come for up to 3 years. And we thought that was pretty cool because our kids were little, just getting ready to start school. And as like peripatetic artists, we were thinking we needed to find somewhere to maybe plant some roots for a little bit longer with them starting school. So we ended up here, and that ended up between the two of us, we were in the residency for 4 years. And Tulsa just became home. It became like a real easy place to live, a really fun place to be with our kids, and super conducive to making art and kind of living an artist's life. So
yeah, I mean it's amazing when you walk into your studio. It's just this haven of space and colors and light. It was so impressive. And it was interesting to I guess we'll start talking about your show first, because there's quite a few questions actually I have, and some things that I wanted to kind of delve into. But we'll start out just with the show that we have here, and
okay.
Rhythm Don't Rhyme. It was an interesting way that I think we worked it out, in a sense of like what we were going to show, to make it a kind of cohesive representation of where you are now, what you're thinking about as an abstract artist, and where that finds itself. And what I was so struck by the series of this particular show was the individualness of each piece. I call it stubborn because they are, but they kind of don't have necessarily a center other than their own being or their own presence. And what's so interesting about your previous work, there was always kind of a figure ground situation. There was not necessarily a horizon line, but something you kind of could hold on to. And with these paintings, they just exist on their own. And just wanted to take a quick look. I mean, here, for example, they're in your studio, of course, in the, and we see immediately that I, I mean, for some, it's almost central composition that it comes from the inner and then out.
Yeah.
But we would all, I mean, of course, you're aware of it, but did that put into play at all when you were working on this series?
The center out. I think, I mean, I probably, if I look back at a lot of my paintings, there is a certain kind of centrality to them. Whether that's like the more grounded form, like some of those you're seeing there.
Yeah, like the ones I'm pulling up now, which is I apologize for where this installation was. I don't have
This
it on.
is this is from Iowa City in 2013. Um, yeah, 2013. So a lot of these forms that are kind of soft rectangles are kind of playing on the idea of screens, really.
Mhm.
Our relationship to screens, which I think is kind of a nice metaphor for me as a painter, is like a relationship to a window,
Mhm.
to a painted surface, to a rectangular shape, which is always is kind of a constant. You know, you mentioned stubborn. I've been like stubbornly working on a rectangle for 25 years, and it's like something that still, draws me in. And I've played a lot over the years with the idea of like a frame, a window, uh, looking into or looking at a surface. So these were kind of depictions of screens or shapes like that, you know. So
I
there
mean,
have,
and it's interesting when you juxtapose it with what we are looking at now. I mean, not to pick on that particular show, but
yeah,
just see that there are a few examples that we'll see that deal with that idea of grounding or even figurative components, which these just have a very different um, feel to them. Now, the one that the series that was just a little bit prior, you were still experimenting also with kind of graphite and pastels onto raw linen, and that kind of
yeah,
brought this grounding um, into the work. And by grounding, I know I'm repeating this word over again, but by that I mean more of a literal sense that you could see the canvas structure, then you glazed it, or you use the kind of a matte medium, right? And then you
yeah,
paint on top of that. Um, but in this series, it's pure pure paint, one on top of
yeah.
the other.
And these really come on the heels of that series. Like I feel like in recent years I've kind of been going back and forth between the two series, and after I finish one, I like to maybe jump back into the other. But that previous body of work, like you're saying, it because it's a really specific process, they become labored over in a different way. Like I have to do the drawing first, I seal it in with the matte medium, as you said, and then there's a lot of very specific kind of layering that happens to bring the painting to the final finished uh, state. And after I've done a number of those, I really just want to do nothing like that,
but paint.
Yeah, I mean, I paint on those, but they're slow and they're kind of tedious, and I get a little bit more mechanical with them,
Yeah.
which I have a tendency to flip flop between a real precise control and real kind of expressive gesture. And that's always been, I think, a hallmark of the work, is it kind of, sometimes holds both in the same painting. And that's something I'm interested in, is just that kind of the graphic, the kind of precise, that flatness, versus something that's more um, physical, a little bit more chaotic, a little bit more in the paint itself. So
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was curious, but I mean, with the pastels, I mean, you're recognizing the canvas, the structure of canvas.
yeah,
But what's interesting in this series, I found that um they're very honest and even honest in their own lies. And by that I mean, like, you're showing us texture, of the I'm looking for one specific piece right now. The stretchers, just kind of the stretchers that come through. Here we go.
Oh
So,
yeah, yeah. On
so
the
the work on the left-hand side, you see these stretcher marks coming through. So by that, I mean, like, you're really recognizing this is a painting. This is what a painting's made of. This is how it's built, et cetera, et cetera. And you would almost say, like, you putting all these cards on the table, and then you still create this idea of illusion, of depth, these strokes, or the flung paint on
yeah,
top of it gives it this kind of sensation of depth and another field of or almost of another dimension, which I find so intriguing. That kind of juxtaposition where you're constantly pointing at us like, this is just a painting. This is all this is. And then at the same time, you very lyrically, so to speak, or very elegantly kind of show us this other dimension of a stroke can go. And when we look at the painting on the right-hand side, that does that a lot, where you have this, the underground is kind of scratched away almost to the bare gesso. And then you build into these strokes of dimensions. And then I'm curious about these strokes, as I'm referring to. I assume they're being made with a palette knife of some form, right?
yeah. It's a there are several different types of knives, but yeah, it's a hard knife. Some are palette knives, some are sheetrock tools.
Yeah.
So they're just hard edge knives that I use to pull the paint with. Um,
And that those are
it
also
feels very utilitarian, it feels like patching a wall, it's like, it's
yeah.
very much like, it's not a traditional painter's tool. And I kind of like that, but it's just,
Well, if this is how you patch walls, we might have to go back to the drawing board.
but that's going back to that stripe painting where
Oh,
you see
sorry.
this, and actually that photo with the three there.
Yes.
Yeah. Is a good example. This is something I've kind of always been interested in too, is like where you see the stripe on the painting on the left, and then you can see the stretcher, where you talked about the painting on the right, where you can see scratched in and you see the canvas, and there's kind of the push and pull of the illusion versus the object itself. Like, this is something I've always kind of loved about, and I have a good prop here. Is years ago, I spent a lot of time skateboarding. I still keep a skateboard and ride a bit, but I always liked this idea that the skateboard, especially when you're young, I would pick them out, just for the graphics. And you use it right away. If you're really using it, you scratch it right away.
Yeah.
And graphic is gone, and you kind of have to let go of your connection to the image. And it's just a board, and then you kind of abuse it and use it. And that's something I always liked with painting, is like making an image or making a mark and then negating it, or kind of always being reminded that it's just a painted surface. I'm thinking of, like, on my skateboard here, you have a graphic, but right away, it's scratched and you're just down to plywood, or like the tail, it's back to plywood. In this, the image is gone right away. And I like how that striped painting kind of, for me, like, calls back to that image that's like really seared into my brain for years of different skateboards being abused and loved.
That's amazing. Yeah, I mean, that makes a whole new light on how to see these things. It's like a built-up story. I mean, that's always, and especially with skating, it was your own way, and it was almost like a patch of honor how beat up your board would be. It's kind of like, as precious as it was, at the same time, all the rails you would hit, etc., that all the scratching just showed you were, better than the rest, type thing.
You're at least trying.
Exactly. At least you had some scars to prove it all.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I mean, and what I also find interesting, that these marks are kind of a narration of you experiencing that moment. I mean, I find it intriguing also, especially that comes up with this work here on the right, as far
Mhm.
as a reference to talk about it, you look at these flows and you look at these iterations um, of lines and color combinations, and then you figure it out and you think, okay, I understand this, and then you actually look again and you're like, hang on, this doesn't make any sense, and I always love that about your work. You walk in, you try to figure it out, and then you walk away, you go, I got this, I get it. And then you look at it again and it just, your whole semblance of logic is just thrown out the window because it doesn't make any sense, yet it does. And that's, I guess, the best way. It was that stubbornness that we were talking about earlier, was just like, I
Yeah.
love that you can have that engagement with your work. And it also goes into those details where you all of a sudden have these flung elements that they look haphazard, but then when you look up close, they actually have turned and shaped and show you the various colors and journeys that they have, so to speak. Because that's, I mean, you explained it to me. It was from a palette knife access, and you would just fling them.
Yeah.
And I know it's incidental, but they just feel so choreographed beautifully. Um, as a specific.
It's a good combination of just trying to, like, on the one hand, I try to save paint because I have so much paint waste when I'm doing these big scrapes with the knives, and then they're hard to reuse because if you use instantly going to become kind of muddy if you have 7 colors kind of swirled on the knife. But um, I figured if I could fling them on, they might stay a little bit more true to their each color, and they kind of do this magic thing in the air and twist and turn with each other. And I also like, I mean, it's back to that idea of kind of putting a mark on top of a mark, a way to kind of um, make another layer that's in some way out of my control. Like I can fling it and have an idea of where it's going to go, but when I pull the stripes with a knife, like, that's pretty controlled. It might be improvised and I don't know where I'm going to go with it, but it's a controlled mark. But if I fling the paint, like, it's always kind of surprising me what it's going to do. And um, I like that element of just, having control, but not completely.
I mean, it's what I also find interesting. I mean, we're talking about texture and this kind of buildup, but just for people who haven't seen your work in person, I mean, there's texture, but
Yeah.
they're also not layers and layers and layers of like paint. You're not interested in that buildup. I mean, there's this piece that we see in the right-hand corner, for example. Yes, there's collective layers that kind of bulge up and so forth, but it's not about kind of the build of texture for you. I mean, at least that's how it reads for me. Even though when you are pulling some of these lines, the access builds up and you'll have little um, shapes that form, and residue, so to speak. But it's, I don't know. It's for me. They're not, texture is interestingly enough, even though you work with so much paint, is not something I always think about with your work. Is that something
It's
you?
not, it's not built on like layer after layer after layer, like a Lucian Freud surface or something, where you're just like kind of hacking away at adding and trying to get the right feel of a form. It's more a result of just the process. I like to use a lot of paint, and um, I just feel really kind of in tune with working with it in a large amount, heavy-handed. But yeah, it's not really built up to make the surface as thick as possible in a specific way. It's just kind of a result of using a lot of paint. There's going to be a thick surface. Some are thicker. I mean, in past paintings, they've been much thicker. Some have been completely thinner and been washed out paintings. So again, that kind of comes and goes with different series. These tend to be like fairly thick, I think.
Yeah, but it's. I think it's also, you like the gesture, and that
Yeah.
takes more charge of the conversation. you know,
Yeah.
be it a gesture of a shape or be it a gesture of a stroke. And
A lot of these paintings were made wet on wet, so I still like to use oil because it gives you that room to work on them wet on wet. I don't like waiting for or worrying about things drying. So they happen. I think part of that thickness too, that texture is just the material and allowing me to work wet on wet, keeping things.
which is what actually makes them even more impressive as far as the clarity of the color that you have still, right? And all these strokes, and I mean, wet on wet, when you look at most paintings, as soon as you start kind of merging and pushing it in, I mean, yeah, it turns to shit after a while, so it's amazing that you are actually able to kind of give us still that really clear impression, and you're still choosing and controlling when you want to lose that. And in the sense losing, I mean, that point, for example, in this picture here, when we look at the whites kind of meeting the color merge. I mean, it's also kind of interesting because you use color combination that absolutely don't make sense. You know what I mean? It's just like, oh my God, if I were to use these in any setting, it just wouldn't work. And especially when you are pulling them, it's just impressive that they don't merge. I mean, that also makes them fun, it makes them playful, and it makes you just kind of like, I am what I am type of feelings. That I think that's what I really enjoy about these series. They're not anything other than themselves.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And
Even one from the next to the next.
it's rather impressive. I mean, it's actually the ideal of what you would want from an abstraction is just self-reference. It's no longer a figure ground conversation.
So that one you have pulled up is probably, calls back a little bit to previous work with the implied kind of plane in there and the dimensionality that comes into the right side with what looks like a receding block or plane or plinth or something. That dimension, that shadow. Also, the painting on the right here, the slip disc, has that black line on the bottom that also is like a little nod back to older paintings that had the horizon line.
I think as a viewer, you can never escape kind of referencing something because you want to hold on to it. You want to make sense. You want to implement your own impressions or your own sense of safety, because we all know something new is always scary. I was thinking about this yesterday, and and I wanted to ask you: do you ever question the process of painting, and how do you experience it? I mean, it's is it a guttural reaction? Is it all about like you just interacting with the piece, or do you have a kind of a philosophical approach to it? I would just be curious.
I think my questioning of the process is maybe from my own like say from a series to a series, like when I talked about going from the pastel based drawing paintings to this, it's like a questioning of a process I use or a technique I might use. Like I might question what I'm up to and then want to shift it, challenge it a little bit. And that, even now, like I just started doing some plein air painting yesterday because I'm just kind of
Oh, really?
curious about just a complete shift of like, now I'm going to stand outside and like reference something, and what does the painting look like when I try to do that? Is it purely referential kind of optical illusion, or is it still like pushing paint on a surface? Is it, what's happening? So
But I mean, you've done a few things where you reference nature. I mean,
yeah,
I'm thinking of some of your leaf paintings or where leaves start to be featured. I mean, it's curious. With your work, there's definitely a line. It's almost like you look back and you kind of go, "Oh, that was interesting," and you kind of blow that up into a new series of painting. It's kind
Yeah.
of this machine that just kind of swallows itself up constantly.
Yeah, and that like putting the leaves in and stuff, I mean, they're still kind of graphic and flat. You know, they're almost like cartoon leaves. I feel like
Sure.
that the language of an image often still comes out of, it's almost kind of a humorous flat, even the way these planes are kind of depicted in that yellow painting. You know, it's like a real simplified version of something in space. Another way that maybe nature comes in is atmosphere. You know, I might be interested in an atmosphere of light. So the
I
way I
was just
paint
going to point
color
that out.
field, yeah, that's a different way that it could come about, is just understanding light. Or that painting on the right still kind of feels very landscapey to me, even though
Mhm.
it's constantly in motion. You know, feels like the desert and the beach at the same time. It feels like a sun-soaked space somewhere, you know, but it's hard to define even for me, but it evokes something.
Yes, there's a ground, a foreground and a background, but at the same time, they kind of push each other back. I think that's one of the fascinating paintings I have in the show is this one in the middle here, you know, where initially when I saw it in the studio, I thought that Gray was like, okay, that's a recessing. That's what's calming down this conversation of what all this mark making. You know, you have um, this huge emblem of um, of gatherings. And then actually when we put it up here, and I think you were also slightly surprised, is how reflective it was. So all of a sudden, actually the marks were the ones that were calming the whole thing down, and the reflection was pushing it forward, so that all of a sudden the background became the foreground. And then that push and pull is really, um, it's a dance, and yeah, fun to see, you know, so energetic. I mean, that's what I really like.
Yeah,
Um,
I love that ambiguity in a piece like that. And that's something that, you know, as I'm making it, is kind of surprising myself, because I set out with a similar intention of, you know, I'd accumulated like a field of marks, stripes. Some were just pulls of color, and then there's two different grays, kind of a warm and a cool gray, that fill all the negative space that were intended to kind of, as you say, in a way, kind of calm it down or like fill that space. But as I was doing that, you know, it does something completely different opticality wise for me. And it surprises me how the push and pull kind of flip
yeah,
flops, you know, like it's quirky, you know, it like surprises me too. And that's what keeps me making the painting, is I like to discover those surprises for
yeah,
myself. And
and
what's actually happening here? I can't even tell what's happening. You know?
and you said it's ambiguous, but at the same time, they're very confident. You know, that's what I like about the works. I mean, it's not just like bold because of the mark, but they're very confident, just like, this is what I am. And even if there is a quote unquote mistake or a mishap or something, there's a reason for that existence. And that's what I like about the work so much, is that, you know, you're pushing that surface so far. I mean, even down to some of the paintings in your studio, you've literally killed, but you
Yeah.
keep going, you know. That's what I always like, because I've been there a couple of times where I'm just like, yeah, wow, that painting's really dead, and you're like, yeah, but I'm gonna push it further. I'm like, Jesus, like from where, you know, and just
Yeah.
to kind
I
of
just I
understand.
just worked on a piece that's 14 years in the making. I just changed it a little bit more because I thought, well, I still haven't resolved it. There's something there, but I used to do that a lot. I do that a lot less anymore. And part of, I mean, something that's interesting that's kind of informed this group of paintings too, which I wouldn't have expected, was a project I did about, well, it was right before the pandemic, so maybe 4 years ago.
Mhm.
A project here in Tulsa with the Philbrook Museum and the Tulsa Ballet, and they had invited me to do a collaboration with the ballet, and I thought at first that I was going to do some backdrop paintings for the ballet, and
Mhm.
in a historical nod to other painters that had done something like that. But right away, the choreographer wanted me to engage with the dancers, and wanted the dancers' bodies to make prints on the paintings. And we kind of went back and forth on what would happen. But ultimately, what happened was I made paintings on stage while the dancers did their dance kind of around me, and in response to my painting. And I I did this. We did 11 performances where I would make a painting on the stage in 22 minutes, and it was started, as a blank canvas. The dancer would come on, make a few marks, and then I would work on the painting for 20 minutes. And I really had to it was so different than anything I did in my studio, which I kind of labored over by myself.
Yeah.
Just like in front of an audience, with my back to the audience, though, because I was facing the painting.
Sure.
But I had to trust that I could do something in 20 minutes that could stand on its own. It had to be a complete painting.
Painting,
And
yeah.
it was it really, I had to embrace a gesture, a quick movement. And I think that's really informed these new paintings in a strange way. It came back around after the previous series of the labored over charcoal drawing paintings. I wanted to get back into trusting my instinct, in front of a bare canvas, and just making a mark and kind of resolving something on its own terms.
Well, or even accepting its own terms. Maybe
Yeah,
that,
accepting its own
you
terms.
know,
So
and
yeah,
not
it's interesting how that came back to inform that.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's been such a pleasure to see these works and also engage with them, and having to sit in front of them and kind of trying to understand them at each point. And it's a real pleasure. And for the audience, the show is up until June 24th. We'll be extending it actually by a day. And it's at our gallery here in Dallas, Texas. With no further ado, I really want to thank Eric for his time and sharing with us his ideas about painting and just how he approaches it. I feel I've learned a lot about just even sitting here and talking to you and thinking about them. And I hope to learn much more as I'm going to sit back and look a little further. So I really appreciate your time, and
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Bart.
okay, great. Thank you. Bye.
Okay.